Rock and roll. I'm going to finish my last drip of coffee.
Beautiful. We're in live. We've already got Viper Dave. Let me highlight. He's come in and just saying, hey, all. Of course, to all the viewers out there, I'm live with Greg, or do you prefer Gregory Smith?
Greg, yeah, Greg works.
All right. I'm live with Greg. Designed, I've got, at least from what I saw on BGG, there's 12 games. And I know you've got more probably even in development, just off the Interceptor Ace, Nightfighter Ace. Yes. Amerika Bomber, which is a very cool concept where you're bringing Germany is winning World War II and they're bringing their attacks to the mainland of the United States.
History there, sure.
Love it. Imperial Tide, which I'm wearing, which is you've done Pacific Tide, and then Imperial Tide is World War I, and the same similar kind of system.
I was working on it last night, actually, at about 3 in the morning. So yes,
beautiful.
By the way,
excellent. Hunters and Silent Victory. Hunters, is that your biggest seller?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's just raw numbers. It was my original game, and I guess I would say that I got lucky. I kind of pushed all the right buttons, and so because my first design did really well, it opened up a lot of doors for me. So no complaints on how that one turned out.
Sure. Now that debuted in 2012, if I remember right.
2013.
2013.
Okay. I had demos at WBC at 2012, but real quick, just to sidetrack back to my name. And there was an interesting comment one guy made, is like, isn't this a disturbing trend of, these designers putting their names on the front of the box? And I mean, it's simple branding, basically.
Sure.
And people might think, gee, kind of ostentatious, here you are, Gregory M. Smith. Well, let me break the news to you. There's a lot of Greg Smiths out in the world, like tons.
Sure.
So I kind of wanted to set apart, but but I see the branding business, for what it's worth, I really see it as a good thing for the consumer, not necessarily for me, because if somebody tries one of my games and they dislike it,
yep.
I mean, it serves as a warning as much as advertisement. So
it's very much like the author. I mean, an author can sell a whole set of books based on, I love the style of
yeah, sure. So I mean, but it works both ways, and and I've said it many times, on other shows, my games aren't for everybody. It is a sort of a specific genre, the solitaire narrative games. So, but anyway, that's sort of the story behind Gregory M. Smith. When I was an armor officer, and I was in 573 tank, 573rd Armor at Fort Knox. I was the adjutant S1. The S2 was Gregory S. Smith. I mean, trust me, there's a lot of us out there. So yes, I try to differentiate it a little bit, but please call me Greg. Anyway, moving along. Yeah,
no, you're 100%. I had a buddy here. He moved. His wife was going through med school. He was retired military. He was Greg Smith, and he was in our gaming group. So, sure. Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. Now, there's Matt Chesnut's got a comment I highlighted. Apparently, Heavy Cardboard is live right now doing a playthrough of Hunters.
Oh, cool.
So hopefully we're not stealing from his stream at all. But
I have a little Hunters news too. I was just contacted by Roger McGowan, the guy who does all the art for GMT, or a lot of it. Yeah. So he wants me to do a C3I magazine article, game, whatever. So I'm thinking about doing a small expansion for Hunters with some hypothetical. There was a Type 12 U-boat that they were planning on doing that they never did. This thing was crazy. It had like turrets and huge gun. It was supposed to be like a U cruiser.
Really?
Well, you know how the Scharnhorst and I'm going to butcher the name, the Niesau Tirpitz. You know how the Germans had the surface raiders, that whole thing going in 1940.
Right.
Kind of before the Bismarck got sunk. They were all into oh, we're not just going to use our U-boats to sink shipping. We're going to send these big honking. So, and they had that surface raiding thing going on for a while early in the war. So they actually had a plan to, well, we'll just make a U-boat surface raider. So this thing had twin turrets. I think they were 120 millimeters. So they had huge guns.
Wow.
And no, it gets even crazier. They had a an Arado float plane in a waterproof hangar. And this thing was monstrous too. It was like 7,000 tons or something.
Jeez.
Literally cruiser sized. Well, of course, you know, they never built it. The diving times would have been so slow. Allied aircraft would have had a easier than normal time sinking it. But it is fascinating that they actually had plans for this thing. So I'm thinking about doing a little expansion for the hunters. Yeah, exactly, like the Graf Spee. Someone commented. So you know, so I'm going to do a little work, I think, with for C3I coming up here.
Yeah, I love it. They had sent me their Gettysburg from Mark Herman, the deluxe edition. And then what, C3I 33, I think they send me the magazine because that had the, I think it's his Waterloo, the Waterloo version in that magazine. So I love what C3I is doing. I actually told them I got it, and I had plans to break out the game and get going. It's low counter density. And I was reading the articles going, this is phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know, and I knew Mark had done.
The thing is, I always thought it was a house mag. I always thought it was GMT's house magazine, but technically, actually, it's not. They're in it. They do on whatever. But anyway, besides the point.
Great production value, though. I mean, it was really in the in-depth articles. I told them, hey, man, I'm getting slowed down by reading this thing. I was loving it. So let's see. Let's go back. Let's go all the way back. And when did you first get into board gaming, tabletop games? You know, what brings you in, and about what age are you?
I was 15 years old. Maybe it was 16. Might have been 16. I got a subscription to Strategy and Tactics, issue 30, Destruction of Army Group Center. I was like, oh my, wow, this is neat stuff. And so that kind of started it. I just was amazed. And I think that's also why I was a SPI fan more than an Avalon Hill fan.
Okay.
Because I started with Strategy and Tactics. I didn't start with the Avalon Hill stuff. And so, you know, in college, it was, first off, it's thanks for that comment, Simo. It's a miracle, actually, that I graduated from college. Wacht am Rhein, Highway to the Reich. We would play these things for days, not to mention Dungeons and Dragons.
There you go.
Which, by the way, is probably the only gaming I did in college. It was not a waste of time because Dungeons and Dragons, I think, has had a strong impact on my game design philosophy.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Because think about, if you play any of my games, you know, you're tracking one guy or one weapon system, typically the solitaire games, not like Pacific Tide or Imperial Tide. Right. You're tracking a guy and you know, he progresses and his skills progress. Whoa, sounds like my night elf just hit, you know, level 10. Sure. So it is sort of that, but also from the viewpoint of, I think it's important that you actually care what happens.
I agree.
But also I'm sure you've played war games. Let's bear with me for a second.
Sure.
It's turn 10 of a 10-turn game. And you've just suicided 5 Panzer divisions to capture 1 square. You know, you only have 3 guys left on the map, and the Russians have 50 guys, but you don't care because, hey, I win. I took the square. Well, so that's sort of the last turn, you know, butcher your entire army just to capture 1 square. That just never really, I always just had a mental disconnect with that. I just distaste for that. And so, you know, that's sort of the, that's why D&D, I actually think, has had an impact on my game design philosophy to a degree.
Very cool. My son actually is 13. I have 2 sons. My oldest son's 13. He leans either hardcore RPG or it's a tabletop game with heavy story RPG elements. And it's just funny to see, him progress as, he was making his own role-playing game and he wanted a system. And so I had a Fate Core book and, I just, he's bringing his buddies over and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So no, I totally get that. That's awesome.
It is interesting. One wouldn't normally put war games together with D&D, but there could be a connection.
Well, and my first game is in the Avalon Hill. It is B-17 in 1983. And it was what was very interesting. I loved the B-17 was my favorite plane, and the idea of that a crew coalescing, coming together, and pushing over the skies of Germany. I'd read tons, and so when I saw the game and picked it up, but a big part of it was just what you said. You get attached to that crew and even to that plane.
Yeah,
and it's dashed and it's gone. And some of the Greg Schmidtkins or Judd, who I'll have on the show when we do our ham tag stuff, it as a 13-year-old, and it sounds weird, but it taught me a lot about understanding, the harder side of war too, that this isn't just planes going over and dropping bombs. And it was weird that a cardboard paper game could impart that. The
human dimension,
yes,
which in many games is ignored, and that really shouldn't be. But very good point. But
100%.
Well, anyway, I was always an SPI guy early on. So all you Avalon Hill lovers, well, I mean, I played the ton out of B-17 too. But,
now, did you go right into the military after college?
Yeah, I came from a not so well-off family, and the Army was gracious enough to pay for my college. And then I was gracious enough to repay them with first 4 years of my life after college. But started off being 4 years, and it ended up being 20 over that.
Beautiful. So you retired out of the with full service then?
Yeah, I actually retired twice, but that's a different story.
Okay.
Well, I'll get to that real quick. So I knew that I was actually going to really like the Army. I thought of it as a prison sentence. It was like, oh, I got to repay them because they paid for my college. I got a scholarship, so I'm gonna do my time and be done. Well, I walked into my BOQ room at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and the other officer that was assigned to be with me, the other second lieutenant, had a terrible Swiss sword set up on my bed. I'm gonna like the Army. This is good stuff. And so we in our spare time we war gamed like crazy. That was good times.
Love it.
So I actually did a lot of wargaming in the Army in my spare time as a lieutenant, and later on, actually when I was a tank company commander, I used a computer war game. We played a war game that they had out. Oh gosh, it was horrible. It was like by today's standards, it would be laughable. But I made them write operations orders based on the situation on the map and stuff. And it was actually, I guess, cutting edge for 1985, but kind of interesting. I retired, went to Iraq in 91 in a tank unit. So I actually have armor combat experience, I guess you'd say. Retired in 96 as part of the big downsizing. The Army said, behind door number 1 is a guaranteed smaller retirement. Behind door number 2, you have a 50-50 chance of either getting kicked out with 0 or making lieutenant colonel. So I said, I'll take door number 1 because it didn't seem bright. So, and then 9/11 happened, and then the second war kicked off, and I volunteered to be reactivated out of retirement. And everybody laughed at me because it's like, no, they're not going to do that. And then about 4 months later, I was about 50 clicks north of Baghdad, working with the Special Forces. And I am not Special Forces, but I had a particular skill set they needed at the time. And so I helped them out for a fun year north of Baghdad there. And it really wasn't that bad for me. I mean, I got mortared a lot, but it really wasn't anything dangerous necessarily, overly dangerous. But yeah, but in between the wars, I worked for HPS Simulations. I don't know if
I don't know HPS Simulations. What?
They did the Panzer Campaigns series, hex games for your computer.
Was that through?
I have a question. It says, okay, Greg, as a former real Army tank commander, what game do you think gets it right? That's a hard, certainly not Panzer Blitz. Oh, it's not bad. That's kind of, I'm gonna have to punt on that, Kronos. I just don't. That's hard for me to answer at the moment, but I will. I mean, tactically. But getting back to
HPS.
Yeah, they're a real small computer company. They did a thing called Aide de Camp, which was basically what served as Vassal or Cyberboard. It was the original back in John Tiller program for HPS for all our Panzer campaign series. He was the programmer. I basically did the historical research and some of the scenarios and stuff. So basically, and a little bit of design, but I don't get never got any credit for that. But HPS did this Aide de Camp, which was essentially the Vassal Cyberboard of the 90s back then. So it was really neat. Scott Hamilton, the owner, he was asking around on one of the chat forums, and I said, well, I actually did this tank stuff for real, and I think you've got your program seems to be back. He actually had programmed backwards, like the rounds became more accurate the longer the range instead of vice versa. He had a problem. I was testing his software. He was like, and I was like, hey, you know what? You need to hire me. And he said, yeah, okay, I do. Oh yeah, M1 tank platoon, that was good. But so Scott hired me because I was just basically had an option to go work for the Army as a civilian right after I retired, or for half the money I could go make war games. No brainer, let's go make war games. So I worked on the computer side of the industry for a good 8 years. But the second war happened. I was reactivated, sent to Iraq. I came home, did Homeland Defense a couple years, and then I just didn't have it in my heart. I mean, I'd been gone from the company for 3 years, and as much as I love Scott Hamilton, he's a prince among men. Trust me on that one. I said, Scott, I think I want to work on the paper side of the house now. And so I decided to try to get a paper design published. And I did have one. There was a game I did called Defending the Reich, which essentially was Nightfighter Ace. The computer version of Nightfighter Ace was my first game design. Actually, HPS did put that out, like, I don't know, 2004, 2005, something like that. It was a neat little game. In fact, it got some kudos from Rod Humble, the head of Electronic Arts.
Very cool. Now, Chrono.
So I went to the paper side at that point.
Well, and tying right into that, segueing in, Chrono 77 says, actually, now that I know your background, how did you end up doing so many air and sea games?
Well, I've got to start reading the questions here.
You're good. You're good. No, stay on. You're fine.
Great question, but I tell you, I take it's you're not necessarily fascinated by the things that you do. Okay, I understand how tanks work. I have been in combat in a tank. I know the tank drill. So for me, the interest for me in designing a new game is learning about stuff I don't know all that much about, necessarily in doing the research. And so I think that's probably, oh, and of course, U-boats. I mean, I've watched Das Boot, you know, probably as many times as anybody else, half a dozen, right?
Right.
Love that movie, you know. So I don't know. It's just because it's something outside my normal wheelhouse. And so that's probably why I do that. And I had, you know, again, my wasted youth, I played far too much Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe on the computer. You know, I was fascinated by the German designs and their engineering. I was like, wow, you know, good thing they didn't win. They had all this stuff, you know. So that's probably why. And it's people have bothered me repeatedly to do a tank game, and I may yet do that. I mean, I do have a reasonable perspective on that. So, you know, we'll see. Maybe I'll do a tank game on down the road. Very cool.
Now, I got to ask, I trained, so I was a medic in a light infantry unit reserve.
Okay.
And we went down to Fort Polk, JRTC thing we were doing down there. And so we as reservists, although we had all these former Rangers that were they came to the unit to have something to do while they were going to school. So we had great guys. But they put a regular Army team with us to train us up. And then they realized, oh, I had no full-time active duty other than training. But man, we linked up with these guys. The medic comes over and works with us. I love these guys. They were a hoot. I mean, their commo guy is, you know, they had us off on some weird old part, you know, 1940s barracks on Polk. And the commo guy's tapping into their phone line saying, anyone want to call Europe? You know, we're like, no. I mean, they had a PA who was, I mean, unbelievably good. They all got their little dive shorts on. They had a Yorkie dog. I was like, what are you guys doing? You know, and they were like, yeah, you know, whatever. And I was there. So you worked with them for a year, though?
Yeah, the Special Forces.
Love it.
I was at the Siege of SOTF AP, which is a acronym soup for Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force Arabian Peninsula. And that's pretty amazing. I can still remember that, but there it is.
Right off the cuff. No, highly.
The SEALs were by the way, the SEALs were the best. I know that people thinking, oh, they just have a reputation, you know, because they're amazing. Those guys were, because our headquarters, we had Green Berets who were no slouches. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's my branch.
Sure.
They were very good, very, very good. But the SEALs just had a very quiet professionalism about them. It wasn't like, this is not bravado and swagger. They were just solid. They were solid. So yeah, it was a very fascinating year. There's some different cats. I'll tell you what, from my memory, and they'll probably hunt me down later for saying this, but the first half of my tour, it was the 10th Special Forces Group was there, and they rotated out, and they brought in the 5th Special Forces Group about halfway through my tour, a little bit towards the far end. And units have different personalities.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I would describe the 5th Special Forces Group as sort of like a SS Panzer Grenadier Battalion mentality. And the 10th Special Forces Group was a little more like Animal House. Okay, it was like, what? I mean, night and day as far as how these two units operated. But all good people. Don't get me wrong. It was kind of funny the tone that a commander can set. Let's put it that way.
That I would agree 100%. Excellent. All right, so let's move her forward. How about if are you curious, letting us know what you're working on right now?
Well, sure. And I think you had asked me before the show, you wanted to know about what my coronavirus design is.
That's good too. Yeah. What are you doing with your time during the COVID-19?
Believe it or not, I'm not going to grab it. I'll just tell you I worked last night, as I said, on Imperial Tide. Believe it or not, I got through 1914. I'm just playing a test game to be sure the rules all make sense. Oh, that's funny. I still have a Bible. It's probably horribly out of date too.
Maybe.
But
sorry, I won't throw any more up there. I'll occasionally throw some up here, but I'll let you keep your stream of thought. So you're working till 3 in the morning.
Oh yeah. See, I do lose my train of thought. So thank you for the jump.
My fault for throwing that.
So Imperial Tide, really neat. It's basically, it's a shocker for me because 2-player game. I mean, I really wanted to, there will be solitaire options, of course. I mean, it's going to have a bot just like Pacific Tide, but it's kind of really interesting card system. So I like this game a lot. So I've been working on that, but that's only because the artist has just finished the map. The map's awesome. It's really, I tweeted up about the map. So you can, if you look at Gregory M. Smith 5, no, not 4. That's some other guy. 5. Yeah. So the map's up there, but so I've been working on that. But I actually designed a complete game during the lockdown already, and that was I'm calling it tentatively Defending America, and this is Amerika Bomber in reverse. So we get to be the good guys finally.
Nice.
The Amerika Bombers that are coming in and attacking us, right?
Perfect.
And it's my similar solitaire genre, but you've got some interesting choices to make, not just on the, and I mentioned this to Grant and Alexander on their show. Of course, yeah, I feel like I'm cheating here on my homies. Oh, I'm talking to somebody else. But Defending America, so that's my tie start to finish, and it's essentially done. The neat thing I like in that game is I actually added a flight school to the game. So you start off the game by going to flight school. I mean, you're a pilot in the game, right? Makes sense.
Right. Yes.
Go to flight school, go to combat after, graduate and go straight into the war. So I thought that was kind of neat. And Bruce Yerian, who did Amerika Bomber, he's, and dare I say, also bored, obviously, or locked up, because he was cranking out the art already for this game. So I guess at some point I should probably, I think Compass is, man, I lose track. I think Compass has already agreed to do it, but I'll verify. I'm sure they will. They've enjoyed Amerika Bomber. It's done well. So been working on that. Actually working for the Compass Mag. Going to do a expansion pack for Amerika Bomber. So there's going to be 6 new bombers, and a new sheet explaining, basically limited rule. They're essentially the same kind of bombers, but 6 other types of Amerika Bombers, which gives you 12 total. Which the frightening thing is that they actually had plans to, I guess all the major German aircraft manufacturers submitted these proposals for Amerika Bombers, but it's all crazy stuff. But I'm probably going to do an expansion pack for that magazine, Paper Wars. About to start this work for C3I, designed Defending America, working on Imperial Tide. The expansion pack. I think I also mentioned, doing a little bit of work with Sensuikon,
Really?
which is the Japanese word for submarine. So that's the hunters. It's Silent Victory in reverse, where you get to play Japanese submarine, and win the Order of the Chrysanthemum, 4th class with swords, right? So that kind of. Starting at Pearl Harbor and going through the end. So there's a few design challenges. I shipped it off to my lead tester, a dude in Australia I know, Brett Grimmond, great guy. But he's been actually, it's good for me. Sometimes I get fans that are that like push me. Hey, why haven't you worked on the Japanese game yet? So all right, fine. Or recently, but no, I've been pretty busy, to be honest. And frighteningly enough, the lockdown has not been that big a change for my day-to-day existence. Although the wife did make me a lovely mask. There we go. So
very nice.
I'm ready to rock.
Very cool. Agray Day has a great question. Greg, anything you had to, quote, unlearn or bring in the transition from designing computer to tabletop games?
That is a great question. And I will tell you, I think that's another thing that's given me a pretty good perspective on design is the fact that I have designed computer game. And I worked for HPS for those 8 years. And now on the paper side, and I actually brought this up on a couple different lectures. Which do you think is harder to design, a computer game or a paper game?
I would say paper, just because I've seen design schools start their folks out with, you need to understand how a game works.
It's absolutely, paper is 20 times harder to design than a computer game. And the reason being is that in a good computer design, you allow the computer to do what it is good at, which is track data, tables of information, because that's what computers do. They track all that crap. And you can allow the human to do what the human's good at, which is make decisions. And of course, that's the fun of most good games. So computer is unique in that it allows you to track many orders of magnitude more bits of information. And, the key to a good interface is allowing the player to access that information on demand, kind of a thing, and to help him make his decisions while playing the game. Paper side, whoa, okay, you can't have mountains and mountains of data because, well, you can, and it's called the Campaign for North Africa. You overwhelm the player and it's just going to be a horrible game. And so I guess maybe not so much that I had to unlearn anything, but what I think I brought in is the fact that I realized that early on in a good paper design, really, obviously you want the good decisions. You want the player, you want the situation to be represented, but you've got to make a lot of logical abstractions and a lot of choices like that. And as long as you represent the situation adequately, players, I don't think mind abstractions, as long as in their mind they feel like, oh, I'm doing what really happened. But you really got to be judicious. And I tell you a Pacific Tide example. At one point in the design, I had like all kinds of little submarine markers running around and doing stuff. And it was like, and then my dear friend Mitch Ledford pointed out, you just have that in a card. It's represented and it's done, and guess what? It's clean and it's playable. Playability, I think, is very important. Is the other thing, which a lot of I think beginning designers don't pay enough attention to, because if you don't have playability as a goal, what you end up with is a 20-pound shelf ornament forever, collecting dust.
Right.
Might look pretty, but if nobody ever plays it, what the hell's the point? We're trying to make games so people can actually play them and have fun. And so you've got playability. For me, is always a design goal and is always very important. And if I can condense a situation, abstract it so that it makes sense, but it still represents what's going on, plus it gives the player the same sort of decisions that the actual commanders had to make, then then I'm on track, and that's what I want to do. So it's always important to me to have playability. So that's sort of my computer to paper sort of bridge, is that it became apparent to me that, I don't want to design the campaign for North Africa or, D-Day from Evelyn Hill. I want to have something that's playable. And so I've got to learn to condense situations.
Perfect.
And, it's the Pacific Tide example being,
Well, and we in Wichita where I live, we'd had a video game design school, and I'd talked to some folks that were teaching there, and they said one of the first things they do is get them to teach or make a very simple, not simple, but a paper game that's engaging, that can be played, and then they start to learn you've got to have something that engages the player, regardless of how many pixels are moving around or whatever else. And so I knew they opened right up with, like, their 101 was, you need to design something on paper and then maybe even look at, can you port it into something digital? But they worked on just learn how to make a game so it engages the player.
Yeah, because if the player's not engaged, all you've got is a screensaver. Basically, yep. Right. I mean,
Yeah. So Vorpal says he hates Panzer Blitz. It's far too mathematical.
Well, we had a saying in high school: a Hummel's worth 1,000 trucks.
Now on this point, and I'm curious why, but out of the games you designed, which one gave you the most trouble? Maybe. I mean, do you have one off the top of your head where you thought, man, I couldn't quite figure that out, and then something clicked, or is there or do they flow pretty easy for you?
I've had a couple that I've had a lot of trouble with. And I've had a couple that have really just, like greased pigs squirting out of your arms, it's done. Defending America by, this, of course it's a sequel. So that one came easy. Nightfighter Ace originally was, funny thing. Well, we'll talk about, I guess, John Krantz in a while. You had a question about my publishers or how I go about that. But I actually had a paper version of Nightfighter Ace done in about the year, I think it was 1998, something like that. And it languished in John Krantz's garage for many years. I couldn't get it. There was a family issue. So anyway, the point is, I had no access to this thing. But I had actually designed Nightfighter Ace done all the research, always fascinated by night fighters. Wow, that's a good question. Is there any chance I will adapt the mechanics of Nightfighter Ace and AmerikaBomber to create a design which people can play opposed? Yes. Well, actually, the sequel to, well, not sequel, the follow-on to AmerikaBomber, Defending America, where you shoot them down, I actually have rules to link both games.
Beautiful.
One guy's running the AmerikaBomber and the other guy's running the Interceptor.
Love it. That actually came to mind when you were talking about it.
That's a great idea, Nathaniel, and I will actually take that to heart, because I do want to, that would be kind of neat to have a two-player, of course, well, we'll see.
Yeah.
But getting back to design issues, but it was horrible. It was a horrible design, this paper game I'd made back in the 90s, because you had to track the fuel hex by hex, and it was just hideous. And I'm sure, in some airplane games, you have to do this, and it's just like, ugh. And then for Nightfighter Ace, actually, my wife had left for the weekend with her parents to go to a cabin a couple years back, 3 or 4 or 5, and so I was there trying to figure out Nightfighter, and then just the light bulb literally just came on. I was like, oh, if I cross-reference where they start versus where the raid's going, I can just jump them up there and they burn that much fuel, and it's essentially on track for the proper fuel consumption, and it's seamless. The player doesn't have to mess with it. Doesn't have to even think about fuel consumption. It just happens by shifting the counter. And so that was like, oh wow, that was my aha moment for that game. So I was very happy about it. So I do get stuck. Like I'm stuck right now on Spitfire Ace. I just have some real conceptual issues I'm wrestling with, and you might think, oh, it's just easy, you just like your other games. And the answer is every game, assuming you care about history, okay, which I do. I mean, I want my games to be historically accurate as much as they can be. I mean, there are always abstractions that occur, but it's difficult for Spitfire Ace because just in the Battle of Britain alone, they might fly 90 sorties. That's more than any of my other normal games. I mean, the Nightfighters didn't fly as much because the bombers only came twice a week over Germany. So that, and it works out. This is good. It's about the right, enough sorties. Spitfire Ace, there's so many sorties, and the war is so long, and so how do you make that work? So I'm having some conceptual issues there. So yes, I get stuck sometimes, and it usually it's just got to go walk around the neighborhood with wife and think about what I'm doing, and it just sort of percolates for a while, sleep on it, and yeah, eventually the answers come up. Stuck a little. Very, very difficult for me initially on Western Front Ace, which is my World War I game. And then Ian Cooper, Ian the Younger, as we call him. I know far too many Ians, by the way. Ian the Younger there, who was the designer of Raiders of the Deep, the World War I sub game. He and I worked together on Western Front Ace, and he came up with this. Oh, he had the answer. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Because we couldn't figure out how to make the time work in Western Front Ace. And he was like, well, look, they flew a whole bunch, but 95% of those missions, no contact. So we came up with this idea of contact patrols. In other words, you might fly 20 times in the month, but really only 3 or 4 of them are meaningful. So we just don't bother tracking the other missions where you flew and nothing happened.
Perfect.
We skip all that, and we just have the missions, the contact missions, which is where where the fighting occurred. And so Ian came up with this. I was like, oh, this is going to work. So, but yeah, I mean, I get stuck at time. I'm not infallible either.
Now, would you say, just from your perspective, do you think most of your games lean towards simulation or more toward like historical game? I mean, the history's there, but it's more game or more simulation?
Yeah. Tough question. Because like I said, the history is very important to me, and I research the heck out of the games, because what I like to do is, and people sometimes say, oh, the history is just Chrome or whatever, which I hate the term, but but what I try to do is insert the history so that it's painless for the player to have the historical detail. In other words, a lot of what people call Chrome is a lot of extra, what I consider the phrase to mean is lots of extra special rules to represent little historical situations that need to be covered. It's like any Battle of the Bulge game has a bunch of rules on the little commando teams running around, right? Talk about behind the lines, and they're dressed in the American uniform, right? Well, how many Bulge games don't have that? Not many. They all have, and so those are like Chrome rules to a degree. That's a little special sort of a side event, but it needs to be in the game, right? So you have those kinds of rules. But what I like to do is it's like for the hunters. There's all those hundreds of ship targets. Those were all meticulously researched, tonnage, name, function, is it a tanker? Is it a small freighter? What did it? And even though that's, you might say, well, some people might say, well, it's historical Chrome, but the answer is, why not? Players like history. and it's painless because you got to roll for targets anyway. So, oh look, I got the 3,800 ton Nordstrom. That's my target. It's a Norwegian tanker. So it was easy to put all that in. But do my game, I would think that they're more towards this, a little more towards the simulation side necessarily than the gamey side, because I do strive for the historical accuracy. It's like I try to test so that the results given are historically in the ballpark. Does that make sense? For example, the interesting, before Hunters was printed, released, I ran a tournament at Consim World Expo. I had 70 players, 70.
Wow. And
the game didn't even exist yet. I just had like 6 homemade copies, which, by the way, don't ever do. It's that was tedious. Okay, so anyway, yeah, people think that yeah, there's work to be involved, by the way, in game design. It's not all just love and kisses.
Sure.
So I had 70 people play this tournament, and I kept track of everybody's score up on a board, up on the wall. I had charts up on the wall and everybody's name and what their tonnages were. And the really awesome thing was, at the end of that tournament, the top 10 scores almost mirrored the top 10 German scores. And I was like, I think I'm in the ballpark here. This is good. We're on track with results. And of course, crazy stuff can happen. I mean, you could run out a first patrol and sink 2 battleships or so. I mean, crazy things will happen in the game. But statistically speaking, overall, it gives very good results. And that's very reassuring to me when I do my testing, that I can get reasonably historical results. So I'd say a little more on the simulation side. Of course, then again, another great hunter story I like to tell. So I've got a test copy at WBC, and I have it set up, and I'm trying to generate interest in the hunters. And some guy walks up and he's like, "Oh yeah, all right, I'll try this." I'm like, "Okay." So he runs into a convoy, gets his 4 targets, 4 different ships. He goes, "I'll attack from long range." I'm like, "Well, that's lower hit chance, lower hit probability." Long range. Okay. I'll fire 1 torpedo at each 4 ship. And I'm like,
not a spread.
A lot of them are duds, and it's long range. And I'm like, he's like, "Yeah, 1 torpedo at each ship at long range. Hit. Boom, 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 boom. All 4 up." He goes, "This game's easy," and it walks off. I mean, your experiences may differ, there's no accounting for crazy probability. But I would say that I think I'm a little more on the simulation side rather than just it's an arcade game.
Sure.
That's not how I do business, I guess.
Sure.
I do try to make them give historical results. Let's put it that way. Does that make sense? I mean,
100%.
Yeah. So there it is.
You bet. No, like my comparison, if I were to use B-17, it is way more game. I mean, did those things happen?
Are you saying that because you shoot down the entire German Air Force every third mission?
Yes, there you go. I always say it gives you, it's fun. Yeah, it's everything that could and did happen to the entire 8th Air Force is what basically you're getting with your plane. But, and that's why I know some grognards, they're like, ugh. And I'm like, but I got to WBC once, and they had I forget their flight group, but they come in and you play 3 missions and there's 60 guys in a room and they're turning the stein.
I do it every year, by the way. I've done it 10 times. Yes.
Awesome.
Here's my here's all my B-17 junk.
There you go. Beautiful. Yep. Yeah. Yep. There you go. And the guys are so, I mean, then they do or at least the one time I was there, they were doing the book giveaway where everybody's bringing in different books.
Everybody brings in a gift. Yeah. It's really nice. It's nicely done. It's a fun gaming experience, but yeah, it's not, but and again, you know, I owe a big debt of gratitude to Glenn Frank, who designed B-17, because sure. I said to myself one day, I don't know whatever made me think this. It was like, hey, we could do this with submarines. And so that's how, you know, the idea of the Hunters was born. I thought, hey, this whole thing will work. But I didn't want to have it to where you sank the entire British Navy every other mission, you know. So I do strive for a little more logical historical accuracy.
You bet. Oh, let's see. I didn't even read all of Nathaniel's post here. More than a few games are focused on people involved in a hopeless cause. What feelings do you want players to get out of your games?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say that in games, it's a lot of, I think people are more attracted to playing situations. Hopeless is maybe a harsh term, but the underdog. So I think people actually enjoy playing the underdog in games because they sort of want to, well, I'm going to do better than they did, or I can do this, I can improve. You know, it's anybody who plays any underdog. So we have that.
Right.
What I really want players to get out of my games, I really want them to learn a little bit of history. See, to me, a good game isn't just fun, which hopefully it is, and you have obviously some interest in the period of the topic, else you wouldn't be playing the game to begin with. But what I want people to do is, to me, a good game teaches you a little bit of history along the way. You know, and I learn as I do the research for me. I mean, I learned stuff I had no idea about, just crazy things. For example, I was researching Nightfighter Ace, and I learned the one guy was seriously considering assassinating Hitler when he went to receive his Knight's Cross, oak leaves, I guess, maybe. And he was like, they didn't take my pistol away. I could have killed him. And this is in his memoirs, a book about him anyway, afterwards. And obviously this occurred before July 20th, 1944. But, you just, Zeppelin Raider. When I was doing this research on the Zeppelin game, oh my God, they had like over 100 of these things. It was just mind-blowing what they did in World War I with these Zeppelins. And so, to me, a good game teaches you history. And that's what I want players to get out of my game, is maybe an appreciation, a better appreciation for history, or at least some enjoyment of history, and some learning, basically learning, I guess. The amazing thing about I lost my train of thought. There was another game I did some research, and it was, now I remember, the Italian Beneath the Med. Beneath the Med.
Oh, hold on, let me go full screen with you there.
There we go. Which, have you heard the phrase "the slow boat to China"?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I think I can use that in reference to this game as not as an idiom, as in a literal sense. So I'm not sure where this is, or if it's languishing in California in GMT's warehouse there waiting for COVID. I'm not sure. I do have a proof copy. It looks good, so I'm happy about that. But, people, I get great suggestions from people on the internet all the time. And, do this game, do that game, please do this. And some guy said, oh, you should do the Italians. And I was like, okay, I'll look into it. I looked into it. Wow. They had the second largest submarine fleet in the world in 1940.
I didn't know that.
Only outnumbered numerically by the Russians, who had 115 boats at the start of the war.
Wow.
Far many boats than the Germans. Probably tripled their fleet. Twice. And the more I dug into it, I was like, wow, this is crazy. They had a huge submarine fleet. They had some issues technically. Like I jokingly told a guy, it's like my I think Grant Alexander, they have like you're calling this beneath the med, but that, oh, by the way, learning a little bit of history, they operated in the Atlantic. They had a base in France. They had 27 boats, 27 submarines in France, Italian submarines, working the Atlantic. You don't ever hear about this stuff. And it's crazy stuff. They're like, my original name for the game was going to be Brave Men and Substandard Boats. But but that doesn't roll off the tongue. So I thought beneath the med maybe sounded better.
Well, that wrapped right into Byte's comment with the Italian battleships, and then he followed it up with so they can visit their Air Force.
Oh, that's
right. I know.
No, actually, the Italians, I mean, a lot of their boats were coastal boats and smaller boats, and had them all the way to the Red Sea. Once they cleaned up their conning towers, they actually had some pretty good successes at times. And the Atlantic Force, they had some guys with like 100,000 tons. I mean, which is big time. That's as good as, but they just, they had fire control issues. So again, brave men and substandard boats. So it's a little harder to hit with the Italian subs in beneath the med. And of course they're dealing with, you're in the Mediterranean bathtub there, and there's this thing called British air power. Not to mention the fact that the British Navy's no joke. Sure. Some interesting sub versus sub encounters. Anyway, but yeah, there was a lot of really fascinating things that came out from beneath the med, and I was had no idea. I mean, you didn't know that they had such a big submarine fleet.
No idea.
And there's another crazy thing. They had no problems transiting the Straits of Gibraltar. Unlike the Germans were like, holy, they would lose like 25% of their subs trying to go through, right? I mean, they would have guys sunk and damaged severely. What the Italians are just like, zoop, 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 just zipped right through all the time. I really don't, and I don't have actually a historical answer for that. I mean, I've looked into it because it is so weird. Good luck, home field advantage. Hard to say. Can't figure that one out. But yeah.
Now, Agray Day, you covered some of this already, but he didn't have as good an experience with wargaming when he was in the military about the same time. You did.
We gamed our asses off.
That's awesome.
Maybe I was just lucky because my roommate was also a war gamer, and we got some of the other lieutenants to do it. But yeah, we gamed probably too much. Kept us out of trouble.
I like it. Now, Matt Chesnut is saying, by the way, Silent Victory is on sale until Sunday at Cool Stuff Inc. for $32.99. I
was always proud. That worked out nicely. I like that game.
That is cool. We're about ready to wrap up. Is there, any place? Do you have a website, or where can they follow up, or if they wanted to get more information on you?
Well, I do. As much as social media is not my thing, basically I do have a Twitter account at Gregory M. Smith 5. So I have a Twitter account, and I tweet out if they're interested in like upcoming projects or things I'm working on. Every once in a while, I'll take a picture of a game project and post a tweet up about it. So here's what I'm working on. So basically, that's kind of a, here's what I'm doing thing. I don't really use it for anything else. I am on Facebook in the Solitaire War Games group. In fact, those are the joke. Those guys came up with the idea for Amerika Bomber. Somebody on there, and we actually sort of made it a group project. It was really neat.
Cool.
People donated target lists and artwork and all kinds of stuff like that. So it was really neat. But so I'm on Facebook on the Solitaire War Games group. I'm very active there. On all my different game forums on Board Game Geek, I support all my games, which takes longer than I'd care for sometimes. So I've been answering like 20 questions a day since I had so many releases this year already.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if nothing else, I'd like to think I'm accessible anyway. So I'm happy to answer questions and talk anytime with anybody. Facebook Solitaire Wargames group is probably the best way to get a hold of me quickly. And Twitter's a good way to, at least if you're interested in what I'm working on. But I don't tweet very often, to be honest. It's not my gig.
No, I had it early on, and it wasn't my thing, and
yeah,
I let it go.
It's a weird thing. It's ephemeral. I mean, tweet today, gone tomorrow. I mean, it's not really. It's kind of useful, but anyway.
I'm with you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, man.
Well, thank you for coming on. It was a blast. I love what you're doing. Growing up, I grew up in the mountains of Colorado, and got into solitaire gaming predominantly. I just, it was funny. I would get the General from Avalon Hill, and I would see folks gaming via snail mail, and there. I don't remember those days.
Raise your hand if you've ever done that.
Yeah. And there were some game groups in Denver, but, as a 13, 14, 15, 16, my teens in high school, I was like, man, I'm not going to drive down to Denver and just walk in on it with a group. And so I was playing two-person games solitaire a lot, and just, playing both sides. And then, of course, Ambush and B-17. Yeah. So, I love where wargaming and board gaming's at right now, but the solitaire systems that are out. So thank you for everything you're doing. Thanks.
We have come a long way on the solitaire side of things. It's a lot more decisions to be made in solitaire games, and I think that's a good sign. But thanks for having me. It's fun.
Yeah. Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure. If you ever want to come back on, or you got something new you want to talk about, let me know, and we'll have you back on.
All right. Well, give me a chance to work on a few things.
You got no pressure on this side. You can come on and talk about old things. I don't care.
Yeah. All right, brother.
All right. Well, thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. I'm going to sign off these guys. Hang on for a second here. I'll shut this down. Thanks to everybody watching, and all the great questions and comments. Thanks, guys. All right. We'll close out here.